Welcome to this session of Data Summit Connect. Uh, this session, we are going to be talking about solving data integration and governance headaches from ground to cloud. I'm Mary D. Ojala, and I'm the conference program director for Information Today. That includes, of course, Data Summit Connect. Our speaker today is John Loyens. He is Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Data World. And I would also like to thank our diamond sponsor, Sumo Logic. And we are now going to move into John's talk. Data governance is killing your business. Sounds threatening. Time to fix it. John.
I really appreciate the warm introduction, Mary D. It's a pleasure to be speaking to all of y'all today. I'm coming in from Austin, Texas here, from the spare room where, I have made my home office over the past 6 months or so of quarantine. I realize a lot of y'all are probably doing very similar things. So I appreciate you taking the time out of the middle of your day, or maybe it's the end or the beginning of your day, depending on where you're at, to come listen to me about data governance. I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. First off, a little bit about me. As Mary
Can't see the screen.
Oh, yeah, working on it.
Okay, great.
Still working on it. Here we go. As Mary D. Warmly presented, I am the Chief Product Officer and co-founder of a company called Data.World. We are the only cloud-native SaaS data catalog available. And it's a product in a product space that I am very proud to be in. And at Data.World, we started the company with a mission of building the world's most abundant and collaborative data resource available. We really wanted to help with democratizing access to data, understanding of data, and data literacy across both the public with citizen data scientist community and the open data community, but also at enterprises and organizations. I've worked at a number of organizations in various engineering, data, and product-oriented roles. And I've always felt that the best organizations are ones that really make a lot of data-driven decisions and run their businesses in a very objective way, built around the data and the KPIs that really matter to them. What I've observed over the past number of years is that, though, to create data-driven cultures and to create data-driven businesses, there are certain things that truly data-driven organizations do really well, and things that, companies that want to be data-driven maybe don't do quite as well. One of the areas that we've seen working with the community, with our prospects, and with our customers, that is really, I think, an area that a lot of organizations really stumble around is the idea of data governance. We've seen data governance be a very enabling thing, but more often than not, we see it as being a very restrictive thing, something that really puts the limiter on your ability to build a truly data-driven culture, right? So one of the things I want to start with here when I talk about this is what actually creates a data-driven culture. I think we kind of know what a data-driven culture is when we see it. It's one that uses the data assets and the ecosystem that they've built around data analytics really effectively to drive decisions. I'll reference this throughout my talk, but there's a great book by an author named Thomas Tungus called Winning with Data, where he references the idea of you see data in the morning and it changes what you do in the afternoon. And that's really, I think, what a lot of companies should aspire to when it comes to building data-driven cultures. One that really encourages data literacy, encourages people to make data-driven arguments in that same way that Jim Barksdale used to say. Jim Barksdale was the former CEO of Netflix, and prior to that, Sun Microsystems, when he would say, or not Netflix, sorry, former CEO of Netscape, getting my eras confused, where he would say, bring data to an argument. If you bring opinions, we're just going to go with mine. And, as pithy as that is, we want to create cultures where people understand how to ask questions appropriately. We're able to work around problems using the data that we have on hand. And, people are able to make data-driven arguments, and those arguments are listened to and understood, right? We understand that to be a data-driven culture. But what actually creates a data-driven culture? Oh, I'm here to tell you that, it's really tough. And it's one of those marketing speak things that you see out there in the marketplace a lot, right? You see people asking, well, what is a data-driven culture? But you see all sorts of products promising to be a silver bullet to get you to the promised land of having a data-driven culture. I've seen everything from, data warehouses, and I mean, there are some killer data warehousing tech out there today, that I'm a huge fan of, right? To self-serve BI tools, to data prep tools, to everything in between, claiming to be the magic unlock that's finally going to get you to having a data-driven culture. Well, I'm here to tell you, there's not one tool that is going to be that magic unlock. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of advocation and a lot of championing the idea of using data appropriately. But how do we take the friction out of that process? And that's something that we have to ask ourselves, right? Now, when we work with a lot of our prospects and you think about data culture, right? We see a lot of companies, as they try to build a data-driven community internally, walk up this data maturity curve. A lot of folks, frankly, get stuck down at the operations level, right? Trying to, get stuck in this endless cycle of building out new IT, trying to adopt new tools, building out new infrastructure. If it wasn't, columnar data stores, then it was Hadoop-based data lakes. Now it's cloud-based data, or new SQL data warehouses, right? It's adopting, a Python machine learning environment or anything like that. But, you get stuck in this rut of constant building, right? And it's tough to get out of that rut. I've certainly worked at organizations that have done that. In fact, the company that I was at prior to forming Data.World, I think was stuck in one of these ruts where, we were in really the fight of our lives trying to compete against a very data-driven competitor who did incredible things. And, we were like, why can't we get there? We were spending time and time again, time over time, trying to be like, okay, well, maybe we need a data lake. Well, now we got to go add Tableau. Now we need to build out a data science team and hire this team of data scientists. But we could never actually get people to adopt the tooling that we were building. And I think that's where you get to the second place, right? This idea that, okay, well, maybe you have built out some really great infrastructure where, you have a really great data pipeline where you're going from, your microservices architecture, you're ETLing the data exhausts from them into a data lake or a data warehouse. You've maybe got a really great organizational adoption around something like a star schema, a Snowflake schema, or data vaults. People are putting the data together. It's landing in one place. But now what you need to do is figure out how to distribute that data and make it discoverable. This is where people start thinking about adding data catalogs or adding governance tools. And wanting to build broader understanding of your data ecosystem through things like business glossaries. Now, what happens here is generally, instead of being a democratizing function, these functions end up throwing up a big gate in front of all the data assets. So now you spent, anywhere from hundreds of thousands to multi-millions of dollars building out this incredible infrastructure and building out a great pipeline for your data to flow through. But now you're putting a big gate up in front of it and saying, until everything is perfectly blessed we understand everything going on in this environment, nobody can have access to it and nobody can use it, right? Now, obviously, you start getting up the chain here. You start wanting to add data access tools. You start wanting to put more meaning and structure around your data, maybe talking about a knowledge graph. And finally, if you can achieve all that, that's really where we see data-driven cultures, really starting to form, and market dominance for the folks that can build these data-driven cultures really effectively starting to happen, right? That's where you see the big names in this space: Netflix, Amazon, Airbnb. For what it's worth, that competitor I started this story around, the competitor that was beating this up was Airbnb. I was actually the VP of engineering for the demand side of the marketplace at HomeAway VRBO, which was the original vacation rental marketplace that got acquired by Expedia, and by all means, an absolute success story. But we were getting outcompeted by Airbnb because they had this data infrastructure and ecosystem where now, ironically, I've become good friends with the director of all the data tooling at Airbnb. They're able to effectively measure and can report on the fact that over 60% of their corporate workforce engage and use their data tools and infrastructure. Understand it, they have a data university there that really gets people thinking and using all the data assets that they have available. I've also included on this list a company like Capital One, just to prove that it doesn't have to be cool kid high-tech companies that are this way from the ground up. I mean, at Airbnb, their chief data scientist was employee number 5, right? But a company like Capital One, an actual financial institution, has been able to pivot their entire culture around being data-driven, and is making really and doing really great things in the credit and banking space, and really getting to the point where they're achieving a lot of market dominance as an up and coming player because they're able to effectively leverage the data assets that they have by not putting up artificial barriers and gates, right? Now, how do these barriers and gates get put up in the first place? Let's think about our traditional structure and the people involved in building out a data analytics ecosystem, right? If you think about traditional enterprise data management, it's generally split into 2 camps: data governance and data management. On the governance side, that's about making sure information is managed properly. It's all about the definitions, enforcement, audit, control of your environment, right? It's generally run out of the office of the CFO, sometimes the COO. It has a lot to do with risk and compliance, right? And a lot of times you see a lot of people putting a lot of process and bureaucracy around this world. On the other hand, on the other side, you have data management, generally an IT-driven practice. And that's where, in lieu of people wanting to argue so much about standards and process, the IT team, the data management team, is left to, continue to run around in a circle building analytics and infrastructure. Now, again, in a traditional model, this starts to flow downhill, right? And in this flow downhill, generally you start seeing people add governance councils. You see roles like data stewards, data trustees come in. On the IT and operations side, you have your traditional DBAs and now data engineers, obviously, bridging the gap between these 2 worlds. If you're lucky, you have thoughtful data architects, right? And that continues to flow downhill. But this almost waterfall-like methodology, by the time the data hits the actual consumers, you're left, in an Oliver Twist-like moment where you're saying, please, sir, may I have another when it comes time to access or use any of that data, right? This sort of ivory tower approach is actually something that we saw in software engineering in the late 90s and early 2000s. And if you think back to those times in both enterprise software and in the web, that was the beginning of the dot-com boom. And you saw a ton of investment in companies trying to become, in the late 90s, early 2000s, companies had to become tech companies. And it didn't matter what you did, you had to become a tech company. Well, guess what? In the late 2010s, early 2020s, every company has to become a data company, right? That's the trend. But you see the same patterns, the same sort of top-down big thinking approach, this ivory tower approach on how to become data-driven or how to become technology-driven in the early 90s. That approach really means, and what it meant in the early 90s is that the kind of acceleration that you want to get out of these investments that you're making is not achieved. I mentioned earlier, there's a book I love, Winning with Data by Thomas Tunges. Y'all should write that down, go get it. It's a great book. Thomas Tunges in that book describes how to become data-driven around the idea of how to build a great data supply chain, how to build a data supply chain that is inclusive and transparent, that everybody gets to participate in, right? And he describes 5 great problems with most companies encounter when creating their data supply chains and how their data supply chains are broken. These problems are directly attributable to a top-down ivory tower model for building out your data analytics ecosystem, both on the people side with your governance practices and on your data management side with your IT practices, right? The first major problem that Thomas describes is this idea of a data breadline. This is that, please, sir, may I have another effect that happens when your infrastructure is so obscure that you have to ask DBAs or data engineers to get access to that data. Maybe you have to go through a rigorous data governance project just to get access to that data, filling out forms in triplicate or whatever you need to. You finally get access to it. Now you have the data engineer, the DBA on the hook. You're like, can I get data set X? I need it for this particular segment or this slice. They get it to you. How does it get to you? Throw your governance out the window. It's probably getting emailed to you in a CSV, right? And then you're left trying to decode and understand that data, right? That leads to the second problem, data obscurity, right? Not understanding that data. So now you've waited in this breadline, waiting for the gatekeepers and the experts to bless you with a CSV that you've got. Now you've got to try to decode that CSV, and that's taking you more time, right? You're trying to understand, why are there missing values? Why doesn't this look the way I thought it would? Well, maybe if you're lucky, you get through that. That goes back and forth in some emails with that data engineer. Maybe you email some subject matter experts, have a few conversations over a water cooler, which, by the way, you know, in the brave new world we live in, those water cooler conversations, they don't exist anymore, right? How are you going to get the information you need to understand the data, to understand how to do your work, right? Now, if you're lucky enough to get that understanding, this leads to the idea of the data silos, the rogue DBs, that one person that knows how to build that analysis that you need to make your quarterly reporting work, or to make, you know, your forecasts work. You go to them, they have some magic scripts on their desktop. Maybe they have an Access database. They know they have the Excel file with the magic pivot tables in it. And that person really becomes, you know, this thing unto themselves, holding and hoarding the knowledge that the organization needs to move forward. And don't even get me started on whether or not the analysis that person is providing in their rogue silo is actually correct, which leads me to the next thing, the idea of the data brawl, right? Something I'm sure, again, y'all have encountered, right? Everybody goes away trying to do one bit of an analysis, and they come back, you know, you have 2 different teams attempting to report on the same thing. You get in that meeting and the numbers are different. The numbers are different, and people start getting into arguments, right? And, you know, how does a decision made after months and months of work now, right? Fighting data breadlines, trying to get your way through the fog of data obscurity, finding the one guy that owns the silo of the data you need. Now you're fighting with your peers over who's done the analysis right. Meanwhile, you've argued all the time. All of this work has actually happened, you know, in secretive ways with no peer review, no reproducibility available. And that leads to the overall data literacy of the organization, because the decision makers are like, I'm tired of hearing this argument. The numbers don't line up. We're just going to go with my gut anyway. And, you know, data-driven culture failure, right? That's how the top-down, that ivory tower top-down approach fails to give you a return on investment on all that IT and infrastructure you've built out, and also slows down your business and decision making, and prevents you from both building that data-driven culture but achieving that market dominance that the very best data-driven cultures have. So how do we get over this? Well, it's time to work together, right? You know, we need to be able to leverage the IT and infrastructure that we're building out in real ways that map to what our consumers want to actually get out of it, right? It's time for our governance processes to stop being all about, what I can't do, and instead be about what can I do and how do I work with the other people to get the job done. Let's think about a good old-fashioned barn raising. We see communities come together to put together these amazing structures, and they get these barns up in literally a weekend, right? And how do they do that? They have simple rules. They know how to work together. They have common language and a common goal that they understand. And they have a way forward that everybody actually gets and knows how to execute against. Imagine if the only thing that happened at a barn raising is before you got to go there, they just handed you a form, and on the form, the instruction set for how to raise that barn was nothing but rules of what you can't do or what you shouldn't do lest you hurt yourself. Oh, don't swing that hammer at your thumb. Don't run with rusty nails. Don't, make sure that your buddy isn't near you when you fire up your power saw, right? Like if all it was don't, you would never get anywhere. Same thing applies to rules of the road. I want us to think about what the rules of the road actually are. Rules of the road, the things that enable like modern conveyances, interstate commerce, our ability to get from point A to point B, right? If you think about it, rules of the road are a simple system that everybody understands. A lot of it's codified into law, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, it's a simple, consistent system that no matter where you go, you can figure out how to navigate a road system and start wheeling a multi-ton vehicle around with lots of people around you, with the understanding that you're going to do the good and the safe thing. You understand how to be good and safe, but you also know how to get your job done and how to move forward, right? And that's what we want to think about when we think about governance, right? So what is data governance and how should we think about data governance? If we think about data governance merely as risk and compliance, that's a lot like being at that barn raising and only thinking about how do I not hit my thumb with a hammer, right? It doesn't really work. It's got to be more than that, right? What if instead we thought about data governance as the rules of the road that enable us to cooperate and collaborate together? The thing that sets up the norms across our organization to understand how to do our data analytics work, how to source data assets, how to use them together, and how to get our jobs done in a collaborative environment to move our agenda forward, right? So let's start thinking about data governance as the process of doing data and analytics work together as a team, moving it forward. And then what is agile data governance? So this is something that we like to talk a lot about at data.world, right? The idea of, okay, if data governance is the process by which we cooperate and collaborate around our data analytics ecosystem, agile data governance adapts the best and deeply proven practices from agile and open software development to data analytics. Remember how I was talking about the late 90s and early 2000s. If you think back to the dot-com boom, the amount of value destruction that happened, a lot of that happened because we adopted these top-down waterfall methodologies for building software. By the time software got to market, the world had moved beyond that software. The majority of enterprise software projects, the stat out there is that like 80% of them failed to return any investment and something like 30% of them failed to even launch. I think that led to as much of the value destruction of the dot-com boom as questionable business models, right? Instead, out of the ashes of the dot-com boom and out of all that value destruction came two very important movements. The first, written about in the Cathedral and Bazaar, and why I love using this image of a bazaar where people are shopping. Again, this idea of a bunch of loosely held norms and rules that govern the commerce in a bazaar, right, enables a million ideas to flourish. And the best ideas to come up, and we've seen this in concepts like wikis before, and in his great and seminal book, Eric Raymond wrote about the cathedral and the bazaar. And this idea that people can come together and work in the open, checking each other's work, this idea of open source and the open source movement. And if you remember, back when open source really started becoming popular around like 2002, 2003, people were like, no way how can a bunch of source code that's like in the open, how can that be safer and higher quality and more secure than this proprietary thing built by IBM or Microsoft? Turns out, something like Linux, it's more secure, it's more stable, and it's higher quality than almost anything else that's out there. Even on platforms like Mac OS, where they've adopted FreeBSD as the core kernel, right? You see significant improvements in safety, security, and stability. Why? Because everybody works out in the open together. Everybody can learn from each other as that work is going on, and we can evaluate everything that's happening as it happens, right? There is like the scientific process, there's real and true peer review. A lot of those processes were adopted by enterprises and form the basis of the Agile movement too. The Agile movement really, I think, was the other really big thing that we need to adopt, which introduced the idea of inclusivity and transparency in how software got built, and created a much tighter iteration and feedback cycle between the people building the software and the people consuming the software as it was created, right? And so let's think about what the big unlockings to be. How do we unlock our data supply chain, right? So first of all, you do have to realize that culture is key to realizing value. You have to build an open, inclusive, and agile culture. And this should go hand in hand with any kind of digital transformation initiative that you might have, right? Second of all, your governance can separate you from the pack. That governance has to be straightforward, easy to understand, and consistently applied throughout your organization. And finally, the technology selections that you make are going to be critical in building this culture, right? It can't just be about building more and more infrastructure. It has to be about selecting not only infrastructure tools, but tools that are going to enable this critical, inclusive, and transparent collaboration that enables a great agile data governance workflow, right? And this is what's going to let us go from defense to offense, right? Where data governance, making sure that information is properly managed, data, instead of it being data governance and data management, it's more about data governance and data democratization, right? Where, when that comes together, and if that's what it's about, then you can finally drive that data literacy program and enable your company to start using data more offensively as you go to market, right? Now, we have to bridge the data knowledge gap. We have to tackle obscurity, right? And switching to agile data governance is definitely our chance to do it right? When you have an ecosystem where you have a number of data producers who are trying to get these data assets over into the hands of the data consumers. In the typical world that we live in, data producers are generally data engineers who understand schemas, data warehouses, where things physically live. And they're trying to translate that knowledge to the data consumers, your analysts and data scientists, right? This is where the addition of another role, be it a data steward, a knowledge scientist, but really what's going on here and what we need to encourage is adopting product type thinking about the data assets that we're producing. And this data product manager is responsible for making sure the data requirements are met, that data gets used and used correctly, and understands the business. And the best way to do this is by instituting iterative agile processes between the data producers and the data consumers to make sure that the value is actually realized, that the assets that are getting produced are getting managed like the assets that they are. And an asset that's not used is not an asset at all. I'm gonna pause and have a sip of water here. Excuse me. Moving on here, right? Let's get a little bit more concrete about what the Agile Data Governance Process looks like, right? First thing you gotta think about when you're thinking about Agile Data Governance is, What's your team going to be? What does it look like, right? How do we bring together these personas in one room so we can have meaningful, fast, and iterative feedback loops around the data assets that we're producing, right? Now, in a typical data supply chain, these roles are very fluid. The most important thing is that the stakeholders are there working together, and we're considering at all times and in real time all of these folks working together, right? Now, when you get these folks into a room, we really encourage almost a design thinking or agile thinking led philosophy. I'm actually going to be speaking on this next week, the idea of doing agile governance sprints, right? Well, to do an agile data sprint, you think about it in terms of use cases, right? What's your use case? What are your set of use stories you want to be? Develop that backlog, right? And that backlog needs to be focused on end user business value, right? Now, as we start thinking about that backlog and we select those first couple of stories to work on, that first use case to work on, right? Where do you start? You start in that producer side who are trying to quickly curate assets together, right? Now, as a data producer, you need to be thinking about collaboration, releasing early, getting that peer review done, defining and documenting in real time, right? You have to capture the knowledge as the work is done, because the next thing you're going to do is you're going to put it in the hands of the consumers in real time, right? You've brought this all together. You've curated it into one consumable repository. You've documented it well. Now it's time to hand it to your consumers and get them hands on, right? And that is really what we're looking to do. Now, once you get them hands on, right? Once you have them developing this idea of working insights for one specific use case. So it doesn't mean boiling the ocean and perfectly curating all your different tables together. It means curating just enough to solve that use case. Then you measure and audit it, right? And you advise and assist your consumers on what they're doing, right? You want to really quickly and safely enable your end users to get the job done. And this creates the kind of virtuous feedback cycle that enables you to really product manage your data assets in a very agile governance flow, right? And this has huge impact. If we think about how most data governance and data democratization, I use democratization loosely here, programs work, is they start very top down. They start by defining standards and principles, and you argue about that in your data governance committee, right? Then you have to define organization-wide policies. Finally, you start building out workflows. Then finally, maybe you release an asset or two to the broader community, right? And after all this process, which could take months or even years, while your IT and infrastructure investment is sitting there idle, not getting ROI, you could be doing all this in more vertical fashion and driving a stake through use case by use case, refining each of these flows as you go and using the knowledge that you collect with each analytics use case that you tackle to further refine those standards, policies, and principles, right? Now, to do this, you really have to be inclusive, right? You have to bring expertise and user friendliness to bear, right? By being inclusive and bringing all those personas together, right, and working through things, we really, really enable people to work in real time here and really start to break down the barriers that lead to non-reuse in the data analytics space, right? And by breaking down these barriers, having everybody working together in real time, you build that corpus of shared knowledge without having to go in and make it be a post hoc documentation process, right? And look, humans learn by doing. And as they learn by doing, by working with this stuff in real time, you really truly build the data literacy that you need to become a data-driven organization. Now, you could ask and you could wonder, right? Like, what is the role of IT in all of, or the role of AI, ML, and automation, not IT? Talked about that a little bit already, in all of this, right? And it's really easy to say when you tackle the idea of a data cataloging project, oh, I'm going to ML my way out of all the discovery that I need to do. Well, it doesn't work that way. because you really need to consider these programs. You need to put the people back at the center of these. And while you can, in an automated way, collect a lot of information about your data analytics ecosystem, you still need people to start providing the knowledge into the system that can further train any ML systems you have out there, so that we understand and can learn what the data actually gets used for. Without an inclusive environment that brings people into it, right, forming a collective intelligence, we're not actually going to get to the promised land, right? So how does this overall model like solve these problems? We start by solving the data breadlines, right? Because you actually end up in a world where you get true self-service consumption, right? Where people don't have to think about what physical database to hit. They think about the curated data assets that they need. They bring it together. That data doesn't have, you know, obscurity, right? There isn't those silos or that obscurity, right? You know where to get the data, you know how to understand it, because everything has actually been documented together, right? And finally, that leads to real democratization, where these data brawls stop happening. Why? Because you've built up a real organizational level of knowledge of what all the data assets are across the organization, what they can be used for. And we've learned by watching in real time, people actually do the analysis on it. To get this done, to actually achieve all of this, we need a new set of tools. We need a different set of tools, right? The old tools that encourage and think about things in terms of top down, in terms of ivory towers, they are not going to work, right? So, you know, we need a new set of power tools to go do this. And much like when agile and open software development practices took the software development lifecycle by storm, we had to adopt new tools like Jira and GitHub to get our work done, tools that understood this new workflow. We're going to have to do the same in data and analytics. I believe that it won't be, you know, these full suite data management vendors that are able to do this anymore, right? You're going to want, much like, you know, as Web 2.0 hit, you're going to want to adopt best of breed players all along the data analytics lifecycle, whether it's something like, you know, whether it's something like data quality, governance and risk, you know, your data science and analytics platforms, of which there's going to be a massive proliferation, but you're going to need something to tie it all together. And that's really where a data catalog comes in. And at Data.World, we are a data catalog company. Again, we think we are the only data catalog company that encompasses all of this. They're the only data catalog company that is truly cloud native, where you don't have to worry about management infrastructure to stand up your data catalog, where, you know, we take both metadata management and data management into account. And finally, we really embrace the idea of agile data governance and of adoption of the platform, right? And we practice what we preach here, right? I believe that, you know, when it comes to rolling out enterprise software, you know, I think this little slide that I've got here is really apt. And this Twitter stream happened a few months ago. I actually wrote a blog article about this. It's a university professor talking about how they're dumping Blackboard. Blackboard is a online learning platform, right? And how Blackboard was awesome. And like he compared it to buying children's clothes. And if you have little kids, like I have 5-year-old twins, right? You've definitely encountered this, where somebody buys you the world's cutest outfit. And usually the world's cutest outfit comes from people who aren't parents. And the people who aren't parents are like, look at this, and it's got buttons and snaps and makes your little human look like a big human, and it's totally adorable. But you never put your kids in it. Why? Because it takes them 30 minutes to get in the darn thing, right? Like they didn't think about the actual end user in the process. And that's how most enterprise workflows actually are. At Data.World, we are actually different there, right? We want to be a different kind of enterprise software company because we want to help you truly build that data-driven culture. We are not the silver bullet, but you know, we really practice what we preach here. We measure our engagement with our platform relentlessly. And as you think about building a data-driven culture and fixing that data supply chain, you have to think about the KPIs and how you are going to measure the success of your data platform. We do that on our own platform. We even, like, frankly, you know, we we bonus our whole company on it, right? We're like, how are our customers and the end users that are customers actually engaging with that platform, right? We also bring a new radical transparency to pricing that I think you don't see in a lot of enterprise software companies, right? Mainly because we want to align with the business value. Our whole segment is all about getting you to get ROI out of all that infrastructure and awesome tooling that you're trying to bring to market, right? We've also started something called datapractices.org to try to get people to adopt more design thinking, also try to get them to adopt ethical and inclusive data practices. We open source the principles there. It's very much akin to the Agile Manifesto. You can go, it's now been adopted by the Linux Foundation. We'd love to see people using that and adopting that, right? But at the end of the day, we are a data catalog company, right? And our cloud native SaaS data catalog, with the way that it really encompasses being cloud native, metadata data driven, metadata to data management, managing everything from governance to access of data, all the way to being a platform that can be inclusive and help you practice agile data governance. We feel that our data cataloging platform, which really is so much more than data catalog, but I'm really happy to be in that space and to have that category to compete in. We really feel like our platform can help you use more of what you have, make everyone smarter, and connect and align everything to really engage your data analytics community and to get everybody working together in truly agile and collaborative ways. I'm super easy to get a hold of. I am like John Loyens everywhere. Find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter, find me everywhere. Love giving this talk and really appreciate everybody following along. With that, I think we're going to open it up to some questions. I'm going to stop sharing now and
Okay.
yeah, thank you, everybody.
All right, great. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Something occurred to me when in your Blackboard example, when you talk about designing things with the end user in mind, I think what your Blackboard exchange of tweets showed was that the person who is going to be the ultimate user of your product may not be the person who purchases it, and the purchaser has a different set of criteria than the actual end user does. So first of all, do you agree with that? And secondly, from your perspective, what do you do about it?
Yeah, that's something that I think we take a lot of pride in at Data World. We are incredibly customer centric and we're incredibly user centric. It does sometimes make, and this is true with a lot of enterprise software, it does make navigating, as the chief product officer of the company, makes navigating the space sometimes a little bit difficult, right? When your evaluators aren't necessarily your users. I think, the world is definitely coming around to this, but I think the biggest thing that we use to combat that is, like I said, being relentlessly focused on adoption, right? Being a cloud platform, we're able to measure that adoption in far more meaningful ways than like most on-prem or even like, self-managed or self-hosted software is, right? We're able to watch and like, hey, our COO actually says, hey, we're data.world, not data.ego, right? And, I think that's really important. We have a data-driven culture, and we're able to bring a lot of those best practices to bear at our customers. And we hope that our customers and in our sales cycles, people see how we're different in that way and how dedicated we are to users, right? We like to say that we have a consumer grade UX and consumer driven end user experience. And a lot of that too is driven out of the fact that we are the world's largest collaborative data community, right? Every day we have thousands and thousands of citizen data scientists logging into data.world to discover all the open data that we've cataloged, collaboratively add metadata to it and collaborate together on some really awesome problems out there. So we learn a lot from them as well. And that really hones our user experience too. But it is a fine line to tread. I think that we've got a great formula, but it is something where, as a product manager and as a software engineer, it's something that we always have to be aware of, because ultimately our value to the enterprise, if we want people to renew, it's got to get used. It can't be shelfware, right? And we see that a lot in the market as well. A lot of people adopting, getting these top-down flows. A lot of people adopt, try to force something top down and never sees adoption. Well, at that point, if it doesn't see adoption, where's your ROI? And the thing gets shut off.
Okay, we have a question here. Would Agile Data Governance Organization need a CDO and data team, or is it a decentralized organization?
This is actually really interesting. Thank you for asking that question. That's a great question. No, I think CDOs and a centralized, data team, particularly when it comes to standards, is really, really important, right? If you think about it, when we adopted Agile in software engineering, do CTOs go away? Absolutely not, right? But a CTO is there, to establish, kind of those working norms, right? I think a great CDO and a CDO that's going to be very successful in their role is one that's going to focus on enabling the organization, that is going to focus on enablement and on collaboration in the data ecosystem, and focus on, establishing those norms, establishing the rules of the road, but then getting everybody to really play well together. I think a really great analogy, honestly, is like watching in the business world, the adoption of design thinking, and how design has been adopted as well, and how people are hiring, chief experience officers and stuff like that, right? Like everybody needs to participate in this stuff and think about it, but it doesn't get centralized. And this is an ongoing debate in design communities too. Should we be centralized or should we spread it across the business, right? How do we organize? Usually most organizations at scale end up with some sort of center of excellence within, matrixed out organizations. And I see data analytics going that way as well. I think a lot of the reason we haven't talked about these things in the past though too is, data analytics has been such a lone wolf sport for so long. Even as data analytics teams have been grown, you're usually the lone data scientist or lone analyst on a single business team. And so you don't have to think about things like reuse or reusability. But now as these teams are growing and more people are getting involved, and people of different personas are wanting to get involved as well, we need a better way of collaborating and really organizing around these ideas, right? Like, it's funny, I will say this, right? Like, I can go hire, if I had a new business idea tomorrow, right? I go hire a team of software engineers. I go get 5 software engineers together, a product manager, a designer. I can be like, okay, we are going to, create the, we're going to create the Uber for delivering diapers. Rando idea, right? My product manager will sit there and I'll be like, okay, we're going to do like Scrum style Agile. We're going to use Jira. We're going to use GitHub. The most senior engineer will be like, okay, we're going to be continuous integration, continuous deployment. Okay, we will start whiteboarding out the stories, get going. First sprint starts. 2 weeks later, we have software, right? And it's because we have a shared language and we have a shared set of rules of the road that we can all get started and start coordinating together, right? And we have key tools that facilitate that, right? That coordination. You get a team of people together to do a data analytics project in a room like that, and 9 times out of 10, people are staring at each other. They don't even know how to get started, right? So we have to build that common language. There's common rules of the road. And then we have to select tools that enable us to take the friction out of the process rather than add friction to it.
Do you think the size of the enterprise itself affects what you've just described?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Domain as well affects it, right? I mean, there are absolutely, and we have to think about the ethics involved as well too, right? Like, there are if you're in finance or in healthcare, obviously, you're dealing with very sensitive data. However, I think more and more, even companies that traditionally wouldn't be dealing with sensitive data and personal data, they need to think about the implications they're making as they're doing the implications of doing this data analytics and building some idea around the ethics of it as well. But size definitely matters, right? But also what we think about too is like kind of how much of the organization needs to be involved in data work to become data driven, right? You can have 1,000-person company, but if like 900 of your 1,000-person company, or let's even say like 980 of your 1,000-person company are gardeners. Let's say you have a lawn care company, right? Doesn't matter, right? Like they're out there, they're doing what they need to do. And maybe you have 2 analysts who are like trying to, figure out the best routes for people to take, right? Now, if you are a company instead that, let's say you are a sports betting company, right? Like you're gonna have a ton of people that like, you could be really small. You could only be 100 people, right? But you're like, trying you're constantly crunching numbers. And so, that because you have a higher penetration of people that need to be involved in data, these things become more important at a more accelerated pace.
So what I hear you saying is it's not just size, it's the nature of the company. It's a
Absolutely,
perhaps.
Absolutely.
I was struck by, you had a slide back there where you were talking about AI and ML, but the little bubble on your graph used the term machine intelligence.
So, collective intelligence.
Or
I may have misspoke. Yeah, well, so it's the idea there that you want to bring both, you need to bring humans and machines together, right? Like when you're talking about data governance and metadata management, you're really talking, like if you want to make it into a machine learning problem, it needs to be a supervised problem where you need humans adding intelligence to the process.
Yeah, otherwise it goes berserk.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I feel like I need to work on that slide. I don't think it's as clear as it could be, but that's neither here nor there.
Say, do we have any other questions? We have, yes, one more question. Would you recommend Agile Data Governance to global organizations who have myriad technologies and multiple operating units?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you why. All of those operating units and all those technologies are not going away. I mean, I would look at things like across the board. I would look at things like there's the SAFE. They call it like capital S, capital A, capital F, lowercase e, like the SAFE framework, which is basically a large scale, agile, large scale, like global style enterprise adoption of Agile, right? But if you think about that, think about applying that with Agile data governance. Agile data governance really enables, like in a global organization like that, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh my God, we have to get everybody down to using the same tools, have the same operating principles. We have to consolidate. The fact of the matter is the best companies in the world at this don't consolidate, right? They actually allow the people to select the tools that are going to be working best for their particular circumstance. Instead, what you should think about are selecting tools that enable you to see across the entire global organization to keep dibs on what's working in different groups so you can adopt the best practices in a more organic way. I think that's where Agile data governance can be very, very helpful in that, you can select something like data.world or other cataloging tools and have them be an information radiator for what's going on in your data analytics ecosystem across the board, regardless of the tool chains that any individual operating unit is using.
Okay, great. I think that was the end of the questions that we had. So let me thank John very much for that presentation. That was really good. And thanks Sumo Logic, our diamond sponsor. And we have one more session coming up in the Data Summit Connect. So join us back here in about an hour and we will talk about enabling AI for real world results. So see you in about an hour. Thanks again, John.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you.
Thank you.